When we are in a chronic stress state, we utilize the nutrients we're given from supplements or food to perpetuate the baseline stress state that we've got our nervous system in. If you're like, I'm chronically stressed, I don't know how to wind down, I feel wired all the time, then even if you take magnesium, it might help a little bit, but you're going to use it to perpetuate the stress response.
And welcome back to another episode of Soul Wellness. Now, you can say all the right things to your kids, but what if they can feel when something's off? So if you're running on stress and overwhelm, your little ones, they're not just picking up on it, they're mirroring it. So in this episode, we're diving into the surprising connection between a parent's nervous system and their child's behaviour. And joining me today is Dr Carrie Rigoni, a chiropractor who specialises in helping babies, children and mothers unlock better health by focusing on the vagus nerve, which might just be the hidden key to regulating everything from emotional responses to gut health. So welcome to the podcast, Carrie. I'm so excited to talk to you today.
Yes, thank you for having me.
It's such an important topic, and I think so many people do not know enough about it. I first really got into my understanding by finding you on Instagram and listening to you talk. And I think you have such a powerful way of breaking it down to help people understand. So for those who may not know, what exactly is the vagus nerve and how does it impact our overall health?
The vagus nerve, it is the largest cranial nerve in the body. So it runs from our brainstem, which is basically the bottom of our brain, through our neck, under our collarbones, under our chest bone, through all of our digestive tract, all the way to the pelvic floor. And the word vagus in Latin means wandering because it basically has all of these projections to every organ in our body. And it's largely a sensing nerve. So it senses what's going on in our environment. And that's our internal and our external environment. So that's why, you talk about how our children feed off us, but also our gut health. It senses what's happening in our gut, in our liver, in our lungs, our heart. But it also has the ability to sense what's going on in our external environment. And the biggest job of the vagus nerve is to tell the rest of the nervous system whether we are safe or not. And if we're not safe, or if we're perceived to be not safe, then our nervous system will trigger a threat response, which is fight flight. And I know so many of us might even joke about how we're in chronic fight flight. We can't wind down. Well, yeah, that's probably a sign that something's going on and your vagus nerve is not helping you get out of it. So you get stuck in this fight flight.
Wow. So what led you to focus on this? Because obviously I know it's a key part of everything you do, and it's obviously so important as a chiropractor when you're looking at the spinal system and everything that's related. How did you get into this area of expertise?
For me, it was a personal journey, very deeply personal. In my 20s, I had chronic fatigue syndrome. I tried everything from diets and supplements and all of the different regimes available, saw all the different medical specialists. Nobody could really tell me what was wrong. Nothing really worked. And I found that even on the right supplement protocol, the moment I stopped the supplementation, I would fall apart. Like I just felt like I was never actually healing. I was just getting by. And I actually saw someone who helped me with my vagus nerve and my nervous system. And once I had rebalanced that and realized how chronically stressed my system was, it's like this light bulb went off in my body. I just felt so different. I felt like I was in my body and kind of had that vital life force in my body for the first time in a really long time. That led me down this path of initially just studying pediatrics and going, I'm going to prevent every child that I can from experiencing what I did. I really struggled when I had chronic fatigue syndrome. I don't wish it on anyone. And I was like, I want to go into preventative healthcare. So I wanted to prevent or set children up for a really healthy nervous system so that they would not have to experience what I had experienced. And then when I became a mum, I was like, oh, okay, I'm part of this picture. I can try and perfect my child. child. We
Yeah.
know that perfect isn't true anyway, but I can work really hard on my child. But if I'm not doing the work on myself,
Yeah.
then my child's only going to mirror me. So it
Yeah.
became this big thing of, oh, okay, it's this dynamic between mother and
Mhm.
child, and both is really important.
What an incredible finding to realize, right? Because, like you said, you can go on this whole health journey. And when it really comes back to the environment we're raised in, how our parents are around us, shining the light back on, like as parents, how we need to show up every day for our kids.
Mm.
So, how did that reflection change the way that you parent?
Mm. I think it just helped me have awareness for what I was doing, and start deep diving into how my nervous system is responding to my child
Mhm.
rather than it being a problem with my child. So,
Mhm.
kind of shining that mirror back on yourself and saying, okay, like, how am I responding to this situation? Why is this particular situation triggering me?
Yeah.
And what can I do about it for my nervous system or my vagus nerve to feel safe enough to regulate through this so that it doesn't become something that I impart on my child or take out on my child, when really
Yeah.
it's not about my child at all.
Yeah, that's a very, very powerful. So I noticed on your website you even have a checklist. So if anyone's listening and want to know if they have any issues with their vagus nerve, you can head on over to Carrie's website and we'll put it in the show notes and take us through. So it's about checking their vagal tone. Like, what does it help to do for people?
So the checklist really gives you an indicator as to how well your vagus nerve may be functioning. So I have an adult one and a children's one. You will notice a lot of these symptoms can be related to other things. And that's, often the feedback's like, well, how do I know? Well, if you are getting a 9 or a 10 on this checklist, then chances are it's not really the symptom that's the problem. It's that your nervous system is driving this response in your body. So it kind of just gives you a reflection as to how well your nervous system is functioning as a whole.
Yeah. That's so clever. So, highly recommend looking at that on Carrie's website. And I'd love to know what are some of the signs that we should be looking out for
In children or in
in
ourselves?
ourselves?
Yeah.
Start with ourselves first.
So if we think about where the vagus nerve runs, and it runs all through our body, really we can have symptoms anywhere within that span. So brainstem to pelvic floor. So,
Mhm.
some people might have irritable bowel when they get really stressed. Or maybe you have unexplained digestive issues and you've tried all of the diets, all of the supplements, and, parasite cleansers, whatever you've tried, and your gut is just still not right. Then I would be looking at the vagus nerve for those kind of
Mhm.
conditions. And it could be as simple as, if you experience a stressful situation, can you recalibrate after? Can you go, okay, well, the stress is done. I'm going to recalibrate, or kind of, I hate the word bounce back, but bounce
Mhm.
back into a bit more regulation, and it's
Yeah.
not going to ruin my day.
Yeah.
Or if something really stressful is happening, are you stuck in that state and you ruminate and you can't get out of it and it ruins your day? That would be a sign that your vagus nerve isn't kicking back in. So the vagus nerve is
Yeah.
the brakes to your stress response. It's like, okay, the
Mhm.
stress is done. Let's put the brakes on. Let's chill out. So if you're not getting that chill out, and that's going to look different for everyone, but if you're not getting that sense of recalibration, that's a sign that your vagus nerve is not doing the job that it's designed to do.
Yeah, that's very, very insightful. And I think it's so true, right? We can either let the situations dictate the rest of our day or we can choose to regulate and focus on that. So, what would be some tips if we are unregulated? How would we focus on that?
So the key in the beginning is really to work out, I guess, how dysregulated you are. We have, say, the green zone, the regulated zone, and then we kind of may go into a bit of orange, then a bit of red. If we stay in that for too long, then we'll end up in freeze or numbing ourselves out. So,
Mhm.
the first step to understanding your vagus nerve is working out if you ever have felt safe in your life, if you've ever really felt that level of regulation and safety, or if you've been hovering in that chronic fight flight. Obviously, I attract really stressed and burnt out
Mhm.
people because that's my job, but majority of people are not actually understanding that their nervous system dynamic is not even reaching a state
Wow.
of regulation.
Yeah.
So, number one, awareness is key. Like sitting
Mhm.
down and actually getting clarity on and being real with yourself about how your nervous system is functioning. I think we
Yeah.
mostly know, if we stop and ask ourselves that question, we know whether we're in that chronic
Mhm.
fight flight or whether just sometimes we're in fight flight, but most of the time we feel okay. Yeah.
Yeah. That is so true. And I think we're seeing a lot, and correct me if I'm wrong, but a lot more teens as well at school
Mhm.
going through a lot of this stress and not coping with stress. I've even seen it in my own child this year really highly, is that there's so much expectations on them. Then there's all this outside influence that affects their nervous system too. So what are you seeing with that at the moment?
Mm. I'm seeing more than ever so many
Mm.
teens and say from like 9, 10, and above, children who are like downright refusing to go to school because it is so
Wow.
stressful and it is too much for their nervous system to cope with.
Yeah.
There's a lot of reasons for that. And I'm happy to delve into
Mhm.
them. Like it's
Yeah,
a
I'd love
really deep
to.
topic.
Yeah.
But
Mhm.
neurodevelopmentally, we know that this stuff starts in the womb.
Yep.
And we've come from a generation of women who, a lot of us are overachieving, type A, perfectionistic, told we can do it all and have it all and push, push,
Mhm.
push. And we have done that.
Mhm.
And what we've done is we've burnt out our nervous systems. And
Mhm.
usually, what that looks like then when a woman has a baby is all of the coping strategies they had in place before they had a child fall away because babies are chaos, right? And children are chaos. And then they're like, whoa, I was really stressed. So we do see a lot of women then go through almost like an awakening when they have
Yeah.
kids, right? They're like, oh, I don't want to go back to corporate life.
Mhm.
I don't want to go back to hustle and bustle. But because we don't value, as a culture, we don't value pregnancy. We work to the bone while we're pregnant to get it
Mhm.
all done before we go on maternity leave. And this is
Yeah.
not a judgment on any woman, like, right? This is
Mhm.
just culturally what we do in Western
Mhm.
society. But we're so stressed. And all of those stress hormones mold how our children's nervous systems are formed.
Wow.
And
Wow.
so then we have these little people who we realize we're burnt out and we have hardly any capacity to deal with anything. And then we're raising these small children and giving them everything we have, of course.
Mhm.
But this nervous system dynamic is just setting these kids up to then get to a point where they don't have the capacity to deal with stresses.
Yeah. And that's exactly what I'm seeing as a parent. And I can completely relate with everything that you're saying. So, if we start working on ourselves, say parents start realizing, being aware, trying to slow those moments down, regulate themselves, what are you seeing in the children? Like, how long is it taking to filter across to kids?
Oh, it takes like days, honestly.
Wow.
The more regulated you can get a parent, particularly the mother, but either parent. I've never shared this story publicly. I've only ever shared this on like in my group coaching. But
Yeah.
one time I was doing a challenge for myself, and I
Mhm.
was doing a particular breathing exercise every day for 30 days just to see
Yeah.
how my nervous system felt,
Mhm.
because everything that I teach other people to do, I do on myself. So I have an awareness of what's
I love
happening
that.
in their nervous system. And I kid you not, a week after doing it, my husband, who is like Mr. Neutral, never like super happy, never super sad, just like very neutral, started like smiling more. And I was like, who are you? And he was like choking more. He just seemed like more upbeat. And I'd
Yeah.
never, like, it's the only thing that changed was my
Wow.
nervous system. And
So fascinating.
just so instant. So,
Yeah.
I've just finished a 4-week group program with some mums, and 1 week to the next. So, week 3 to week 4, we implemented some new nervous system techniques, and they're already like, oh my goodness, not only are my children happier and more regulated, but when they see me doing a nervous system technique, they mirror it and they copy me
Mhm.
because they know it feels good. It doesn't have to be hard work if you work with your nervous system rather than forcing it, it's not hard work and it's very quick work.
I love that. And I really love including the kids because I think even if you think they might not be taking it in right now, when they're older, they're going to have those strategies or tools to go back to when they're feeling dysregulated. And I know I tried to teach my kids that. My daughter's always a little bit more hesitant. My son's more involved in it, but he realizes, yep, sit quiet, hold some stones, relax, do some deep breaths, and it absolutely helps.
Yeah. So, one of the biggest things that I teach people when they're first starting out, and I think it makes a really big world of difference for a lot of people, is that I always encourage you to start when you're feeling pretty good. So rather than doing it in a reactive way where you're already really overwhelmed and stressed, and the nervous system is like, why are you asking me to calm down right now? Can't you see I'm fighting to keep you safe? I'm fighting to keep you alive. That's the primitive stress response. And it's
Mhm.
amazing. That's its job. If you're trying to react and say, hey, just calm down a bit, and it's not ready to, then it's going to feel like you're climbing a mountain. But if
Mhm.
you feel really good, if you have a moment where you're like, hey, I feel really good right now, or, I feel really grateful for my partner, my child, like whatever, sitting in that teaches your nervous system, hey, I want more of this. Let's like
Mhm.
build this capacity. And
Yeah.
it gives you that foundation so that when the stressful moments arise, you've got a foundation to fall back on.
Mhm. Yeah.
Whereas if you're just doing it reactively, there's nothing to fall back on. So it's much harder.
Yeah, that's really, really true. So
Mm.
we often hear put yourself first, right, as advice, but mums especially can find this tough. There's no hours in the day, they're sleep deprived. But if regulating our own nervous system has such an impact on our kids, what are some realistic ways that busy mums can do this without feeling guilty?
I often tell mums to habit stack. So it might
Mhm.
be you do a particular breathing exercise every time you get a drink of water, or if
Mm.
you're sitting on the toilet,
Yep.
if your child doesn't interrupt you on the toilet. A lot of mums in my coaching program that I just mentioned have actually implemented doing some breathing exercises on the way to school pickup. So, kind of
Yep.
separating their day of work or their day of errands, regulating their nervous system to receive their kids in a really regulated
Mm.
way after school. So I
Beautiful.
encourage people just to find a place in your day where it's not like, oh, it's another thing I have to do. It's
Mhm.
another thing I have to remember. It's like, oh, sweet, I'm driving and the traffic lights are red. Let's do a
Mhm.
few, slow breaths or
Yep.
a nice long sigh, whatever feels good for your nervous system. Let's just add that into your current routine.
Yep. That's
Yeah.
actually really, I love the idea of stacking because I think sometimes with overwhelm, it's like we don't have time. Like, how are we going to do that? Or we already know that 90% of what we do is autonomic. So if you can just practice into doing it into the same spot all the time, I think that would be really, really powerful. So I love on your Instagram, you talk a lot about gut health, and I'm so passionate about gut health too, and the link between the vagus nerve. Now, can you take us through how it's involved and what people might want to look out for?
The gut and the vagus nerve are what I would call bidirectional, which
Mhm.
means that the vagus nerve impacts the gut, but the gut also impacts the vagus nerve. So we
Mhm.
kind of have to have a beautiful balance between the two. And this is part of why the gut is called the second brain, because it has so many nerve endings in there. It can be really hard to discern what comes first, right? The gut
Mhm.
or the vagal problem. And you probably, if you do have digestive issues or stress issues, you might need to work on both. But there is some evidence to show that any level of inflammation and any level of like microbiome imbalance, particularly ones that create byproducts that aren't really good for the human body in high doses, will impact the vagus nerve. And this
Mhm.
can be literally from an inflammatory point of view. The nerve that connects to the gut gets inflamed and it can't work as well. And we know that nothing works well when it's inflamed.
Yeah.
But if you have a vagus nerve that it isn't working well, so that would be a low tone vagus
Yeah.
nerve, then you have less capacity to deal with inflammation in the gut in the first place. So it can become
Um,
like a downward spiral. So if you
Mhm.
have low vagal tone, and possibly low vagal tone since you were a child because you weren't really aware, and then say you get even as simple as a gastro or a gut infection, a parasite,
Mhm.
you will have a lowered or a different immune system in your gut because the vagus nerve controls that immune system and it
Ah.
controls the level of inflammation. So some people might recover from gastro immediately, right? And
Mhm.
other people could take weeks to feel like their
Mhm.
gut is back to normal. And this is kind of like that spectrum of working out, well, is the vagus nerve impacting that? And
Yeah.
if you have low vagal tone and you get a parasite and it sticks, then that parasite creates inflammation that's going to impact the vagus nerve more. And then it goes down further, you know? It's just
Mhm.
this balance that goes back and forth between the two. Yeah.
Fascinating. So, how do you treat it? How do you improve this low vagal tone and get it up to a stage where your body is functioning better?
Yeah. So the big thing with the vagus nerve is that you really need to work out why it is low tone. There are so many
Mhm.
reasons. And this is why, if you have been on TikTok or Instagram and seen these vagus nerve hacks and you feel like they're not working for you, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's not your vagus nerve. It might mean that it's not getting to the root of your vagus nerve problem. So,
Yeah.
we have neurodevelopmental low vagal
Mhm.
tone. So if you've had low vagal tone from when you were in the womb because your mum was really stressed when she was growing you, and perhaps you had a stressful early few years of life, your vagal tone may be low because of how your nervous system has developed.
Yeah.
In which case, you would need a completely different treatment to someone who has low vagal tone because they have a gut problem. So there's no one treatment, so to
Yeah.
speak. I really take an approach of looking at the whole person and working out, is the gut involved? Do they have mineral deficiencies? Do they have stress in their body? How are their other senses doing? We know that vestibular system or our balance systems play a big role in how stressed our system is. So if
Yeah.
you have a child who's got vestibular or proprioceptive issues,
Mhm.
then their baseline of stress is going to be higher and their vagus nerve is going to be lower. So
Yeah.
it's really, to get true healing, you really need to take a big step back and look at the
Yeah.
whole person.
Yeah. And I love the way you do that. It's really, really powerful. It's such a holistic view because no one person is the same. And I know I've actually taken both my kids to see you and you've been amazing with them, looking at different elements. And I think that's what I always try. And the idea of this podcast is educating people and so that they understand when they go and see a chiropractor who's dealing with this, that they will be looking at this whole holistic view and not just a cookie cutter approach of like, this is how we solve this problem for everybody, because it doesn't always work. So I
Yeah.
really love that about you. So we can really break it down for our listeners of the types of treatments. Can you give us an idea when your patients come in? And I know you're not treating right now, but when you are treating, what exactly are you looking for on each level?
I still look at the body and how it
Mhm.
moves because we know that, number one, the brain really loves symmetry and it loves
Mhm.
safety in movement. And movement is something that we do day in, day out, right?
Mhm.
And gravity is something that we deal with day in, day out. So we really want to make sure your nervous system can handle gravity and can handle movement. They're just like the lowest hanging fruit for the
Yeah.
stress response. That's still a form of body work. So,
Mhm.
I personally, most people would think that a chiropractor does, lots of cracking, etc.
Mhm.
I'm a low force chiropractor. So that means I
Mhm.
don't really crack spines. And the people that I see don't respond well. Like,
Mhm.
I attract the people who have maybe tried a more traditional chiropractor and said, it didn't feel good for my nervous system.
Yeah.
And that's probably because the stress response is so big, it couldn't
Mhm.
handle the input into the nervous system.
Yeah.
So the work that I do on the body is very gentle. And it's more about ensuring that the nervous system, particularly side to side, is working in enough symmetry that the brain
Mhm.
says, like, okay, yeah, I'm
Mhm.
happy with that. And then we just look for signs of stress or signs of vagus dysfunction. So,
Mhm.
even as simple as rubbing your vagus nerve, which just runs down underneath your jaw in front of that, in front of that muscle. And you
Mhm.
might find one side is a lot more tender than the other. And so things like that just give us an indicator of how much inflammation or tension is possibly happening in that area, and making sure that when I'm finished with you, that's resolved or that's really
Mhm.
calmed down. Yeah.
That's clever. Really clever. So powerful. I think more people really need to understand it, especially how it can play out with kids as well. So, what are some things that parents potentially or exercises that they can do with their kids to actually help build their tone?
So, firstly, I would make sure that your nervous system is regulated before
Mhm.
you try doing anything with your children. And that's simply because we have these neurons in our body, in our brain, called mirror neurons, and they literally mirror whoever we're around. So, as an example, if you have a friend who feels really anxious and when you hang out with them, you feel a little bit anxious, or maybe you feel really drained after, that's those mirror neurons at work. You're matching their energy or what their nervous system is doing. And it's designed, number one, to create like this part of the human empathy, right? We can really
Mhm.
feel what other people are feeling. Or you
Yeah.
might see a friend and before they say a word, you're like, what's wrong? You can see, you can feel it,
Mhm.
right? Mirror neurons are really powerful, but when it comes to our kids, we can say all the things and teach them all the tools, but if we're doing something different or our nervous system isn't congruent with what we're trying to get them to do, they'll know. They just won't be able
Mhm.
to say what they know. They'll feel
Aha.
that in their nervous system, right? They'll be like, no, no,
Interesting.
like, I'm
Yeah.
going to match you.
Yeah. You're stressed. I'm going there. That's actually so interesting because how many times do we, monkey see, monkey do? We know that they follow you, but then you have these ideas or you might tell them, go do this. But if you're not doing it, that's actually really powerful. That might be a reason why they're not sticking to it.
Yeah,
Mm.
yeah. And then, what I would actually encourage you to do, if you feel like you can activate some form of regulation, maybe you have a favorite breathing tool, etc., is do it alongside your child. And they will pick up on that energy through their mirror neurons. So without even getting them to do something themselves, you can change their nervous system. So, for
Wow.
example, say you're feeling pretty regulated, your child's having some really big emotions. Rather than you meeting them in their emotions, you
Mhm.
stay where you are and maybe add in some breathing, give them a cuddle, of course, be there with them, but don't mirror them, get them to come to mirror you. So
Yes.
it's kind of like this subconscious patterning that then you teach them that this is what I can access when I'm feeling those big emotions. So
Mm.
it enables them to learn subconsciously, which is,
Mhm.
90% of our behaviors anyway.
For example, if a child's very dysregulated, they're throwing a tantrum or they've hurt themselves, you're going to them from a place of calmness and support with your breathing and not actually buying into what's going on.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it sounds like that's probably easier to think about than to actually do for many people, I would think, in that moment, right? When you've got kids
Yeah.
throwing tantrums, you're running out the door, you're late for somewhere, they're so frustrating. So, again, it's coming back to working on us and how we can then teach them through our own
Yeah.
change of behaviors.
Yeah. And,
Mm.
that's a really powerful in the moment
Mhm.
thing. And I do think it's really important that you do find someone who does body work, particularly if you know you're really burnt
Mhm.
out, or you've spent a lifetime, you're listening to this thinking, oh gosh, yeah, I definitely have low vagal tone, or in this moment, in this season of my life, my vagus nerve is not working well. Body work alone can do a lot for the nervous system. So
Mhm.
whether it's chiro or osteo or bowen,
Mhm.
as long as it works for your nervous system, it's working,
Yeah.
because
Mhm.
it's all sensory input, right? And it
Mhm.
all changes the nervous system in some way. So I would encourage any mother
Mhm.
to get some form of body work that you gravitate towards. And I'm
Yeah.
happy for people to ask me, if you find me on
Mhm.
Instagram and you're like, I'm in, Melbourne, whatever, who can I see? I'm happy to
Mhm.
recommend people in other
Amazing.
locations just to get that support. Again, because the vagus nerve is so long and it runs through your whole torso, if you have kinks and twists and turns, and it runs
Mhm.
through holes in the diaphragm, it has to
Yeah.
run through holes in tissue, there's muscles over the top of where it runs in your neck,
Yep.
even the way it runs over your vertebrae in your upper neck. If you're
Mhm.
dealing with these kind of issues, then getting on top of that, it's not going to fix your life, right? If your life is really stressful, it's probably still going to feel stressful, but you have a bigger capacity to cope
Yeah.
with the stress that you have at hand. And I think that's a really important discernment as well. Like, even someone with perfect vagal tone still going to feel stressed at some point,
Yeah.
and that's a normal nervous system response. We're not looking for perfection and no
Yeah.
stress. We're looking for flexibility and the ability to come back out of the stress response, which is what most people really struggle with.
Yeah. So true. And what are you seeing as far as food goes? Are you seeing any food or supplements affecting the vagus nerve?
It's mostly that if a food is inflammatory to your gut,
Mm-hmm.
let's take, for example, the number of people who are gluten intolerant. We
Mm-hmm.
know that gluten, even in a healthy individual who doesn't have celiac, makes your gut lining leaky for about 20 minutes after you eat it.
Wow.
Whereas if you have a food intolerance to gluten and you're eating it and it's making your gut leaky, then your immune system's going to go, wow, no, I don't like that. I'm going to mount an
Yeah.
immune response. So
Hmm.
it's not really a specific food that would impact the vagus nerve, but it's more eating foods that don't agree with your digestive
Mm-hmm.
system.
Yeah.
And again, a lot of people, once they get their vagus nerve working better, then they can eat some of those foods, not all,
Mm-hmm.
but some of those foods, and be able to tolerate them, maybe in small doses, or just like be able to eat them like any other person. So it's that bi-directional relationship again that is
Mm-hmm.
really powerful
Yeah.
with food. Yeah.
Yeah. What about supplements?
I think a really big one for supplementation is when we are in a chronic stress state, we utilize the nutrients we're given from supplements or
Mm-hmm.
food to perpetuate the baseline stress state that we've got our nervous system in. So if you're like, I'm chronically stressed, I don't know how to wind down, I feel wired all the time, then even if you take magnesium, it might help a little bit, but you're going to use it to perpetuate the stress response. Like
Mm.
your body's going to use any supplements to help your body sustain where it feels like it needs to sustain.
Yes.
So when it comes to the vagus nerve, I wouldn't start with
Mm-hmm.
supplementation. There's definitely things that, like herbs in particular, that can calm a stress response.
Mm-hmm.
But again, if you're trying to do a calmer stress response and you have low vagal tone, then even if you get rid of some of the stress response, your vagus nerve can't turn on enough to hold that. So
Mm-hmm.
it's not solving the problem. It
Yeah.
can be a lovely band-aid, particularly in, times of crisis and really big stress. Like, I'm not anti supplements or anti
Mm-hmm.
herbs, but it's typically not the solution when it comes to
Yeah.
regulating your nervous system.
That's actually some really powerful points that you've mentioned. And it's probably a reason why many people, look to supplements or medication to solve problems, but they're not actually fixing the symptoms, which is again what we're trying to educate people about. You need to
Mm.
know why you're in this situation first to be able to figure out a way forward. And another question that is obviously on my mind as a parent is, how do we limit and what impact is all of this technology having on our kids and on their vagus nerve?
Yeah, a big impact, unfortunately.
Loaded question.
um, so there's a few things happening with technology.
Mhm,
Let's just start with like the neurology of it.
mhm.
So
Yeah.
when we converge our eyes and we look
Mhm,
at things up close, which is most of our technology, but like even reading books, doing Lego, it's
mhm.
not just tech.
Yeah.
Convergence of the eyes, what it does is it upregulates the stress response part of the brain.
Mhm. Wow.
And then vertical tracking up and down, which is what we do when we're scrolling. We follow it
Mhm,
down, then we look up, follow it down.
mhm,
That stimulates the stress response in the
mhm.
brain.
Wow.
So we've got these devices in front of us, iPads, phones, anything where you're scrolling, websites even, where we're stimulating that stress response. How
Mhm,
that manifests in each child or each adult is different, right? Because it kind of depends on how their brain has developed, how sensitive that area of the brain is, what other stresses are going on in that part of the brain that could be perpetuating the stress response. So it's
Yeah.
never only just one thing, right? But tech
Mhm.
absolutely does not help. It
Mm.
actually dysregulates your nervous system.
It's really challenging, isn't it? I mean, I think the move forward with social media with under 16s is definitely a way forward for many parents because
Mm.
I know obviously having a teen prior to that time, it's challenging because when all their friends have access to this stuff, you feel like you're leaving them out. So that's one step forward. What else could we be doing with these kids? Again, limiting time. What would be your recommendation?
Yeah, so limiting time is really important. I think, often we'll be like, okay, you can have an hour after school, but
Mhm.
breaking that up would also be really useful.
Mhm.
Like if you want to give your child an hour, then maybe you need to do it in 4 15-minute blocks.
Mhm.
And once they've completed that 15 minutes, getting them outside or getting them to do the opposite with their eyes will mitigate
Mhm.
some of that. Getting them looking as far into the distance as they can to
Yeah.
kind of diverge their eyes slightly, but really it's that long gaze,
Mm.
getting them to move their body, use their aerobic system to, like running and sport, etc., will all help the other areas of the brain that are more involved in
Yeah.
regulation rather than dysregulation. And then, having them, which is really hard in children, right? But having them
Mhm.
understand how much it can impact your sense of self, and because there's
Mhm.
not only the biological changes, but then we've got like the social changes and the sense of self and stuff that comes from
Yeah.
watching these other people or influencers who
Mhm.
look like they've got it all together, and just like diminishing that sense of self, because that's going to impact your vagus nerve and your stress regulation as
Mm.
well.
So true. My goodness, you've shared so many insightful things, Carrie. I just think it's amazing the work that you're doing. So as we're wrapping up, I forgot to ask you my initial question, which is, what is the one ritual you do every single day and why?
My ritual is I wake up early in the morning. I try and catch the sunrise, and then I take myself out of my home. Usually, I go to a local coffee shop and I sit in peace and quiet because I have 3 children who need a lot of things from me. And I do that because that sets me up for a
Yeah.
beautiful day, because I need that decompression time, that alone time. And once
Mhm.
I've had that for half an hour, I am good to go. So that's what I do every day.
That's actually a really good share. And it comes back to what we were saying is put yourself first. It's not selfish to put yourself first. It's actually
No.
helping your kids.
Yeah.
So I hope everyone takes that one away. That's a really, really good one. Thank you so much, Dr. Carrie. And how can people find you? So obviously, I know you have online groups. We actually live around the corner from each other. So bizarre, isn't it? But we don't get to see each other that much. Tell us, how can people find you?
Yeah, so I spend most of my time on Instagram in terms of sharing information on social media, and my handle is Dr. Carrie Rigoni, Dr. Carrie Rigoni. And yeah, I do have a website and a mailing list. So if you're interested in hearing about any groups that I have running, they will be via email and social media usually. Yeah.
Mhm. Amazing. So make sure you check that out and don't forget to do the vagal test. I think that's a really good one. I'm going to be doing mine too, Dr. Carrie, and let you know what it shows up.
So we'll be booking you an appointment soon,
Yeah.
I
I
think.
think I'm gonna need one. I definitely, upon reflection and listening to what you're saying today, I had a celiac well, she was celiac when she was 7, but when my daughter was born, she screamed, she was colicky, she was stressy, I was stressy, I was a young mum, and when I look back on even just being pregnant with her, the amount of stress I put under myself, again, working full time, doing all the things you talk about, 100% would have had an impact, and I'm dealing with that still now with chronic fatigue symptoms when she's 16. So
Mm.
I think there is so much merit in all the things that you're talking about. And I believe that we can all try and regulate ourselves better for our kids. So we've got so much to learn from you. So thank you so much for sharing with us today.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
So beautiful. And I will see you next week for another episode of Soul Wellness.